Halloween night had always been my favorite time of the year. The cold, crisp air carried the faint smell of burning leaves, and the streets were alive with children dressed in everything from adorable animal costumes to macabre monsters. This year, however, was different. I was 16, too old to trick or treat, but too young to join the college parties. My friends had ditched me, choosing to hang out at the local skate park instead, leaving me with nothing better to do. That's how I ended up chaperoning my little brother, Ethan, and his two friends, Max and Sophie, as they went house to house in our quiet suburban neighborhood. "Just a few more houses," Ethan pleaded. His pillowcase was already bulging with candy, but his greedy grin showed he wasn't ready to call it a night. I sighed, pulling my hoodie tighter around myself. "Fine, but stay where I can see you." The kids sprinted ahead, their laughter echoing down the dimly lit street. I hung back, my phone in hand, scrolling aimlessly while they rang doorbells and shouted, "Trick or treat!" Everything seemed normal until we reached the end of the block, where an old, rundown house loomed like a forgotten relic of another time. Its paint was peeling, the windows were dark, and the porch sagged under the weight of neglect. Yet, despite its eerie appearance, the porch light was on, and a pumpkin with an unnervingly toothy grin sat on the steps. "Let's skip this one," I said, a knot forming in my stomach. "But the light's on," Max protested. "It's probably empty," I argued, but the kids weren't listening. They bounded up the creaky steps, their small feet thudding on the rotting wood. I hesitated, my instincts screaming at me to pull them back. But before I could say anything, the door creaked open. Standing there was a clown. Not the cheerful kind you'd see at a birthday party, but something else entirely. His white face paint was cracked and smeared, revealing grayish skin underneath. His eyes glowed with an unnatural golden light, and his mouth stretched into a grotesque smile that seemed far too wide. His costume was tattered, the colors faded and stained, and in his gloved hand, he held a single red balloon. "Hello, children," the clown said, his voice soft yet chilling, like a predator luring its prey. "Aren't you just the sweetest little trick-or-treaters?" The kids froze, their excitement replaced with unease. Thanks," Ethan said nervously, taking a step back. "Don't be shy," the clown cooed, crouching down to their level. His smile widened impossibly, exposing rows of jagged, yellow teeth. "I have something special for you." "I think we're good," I said, stepping onto the porch and pulling the kids behind me. My voice shook, but I tried to sound firm. The clown's eyes flicked to me, and his grin faltered, replaced by a look of irritation. "Oh, but you haven't even seen my surprise." I grabbed Ethan's arm, my heart pounding. "We're leaving." The clown's laughter filled the air, a sound so sharp and grating it felt like nails scraping against my skull. As I pulled the kids off the porch, the pumpkin's grin seemed to twist and grow wider, its eyes glowing with the same eerie light as the clown's. We ran. I didn't look back, but I could feel his gaze burning into my back, hear the soft, mocking sound of his laughter chasing us down the street. We didn't stop until we reached the safety of a well-lit block. "What the hell was that?" Max panted, clutching his side. "I don't know," I admitted, my voice shaking, "but we're going home." The kids didn't argue. The rest of the night passed in a haze. I couldn't shake the image of the clown from my mind. Those glowing eyes, that predatory grin. When I finally went to bed, sleep didn't come easily. I woke up to the sound of Ethan screaming. Bolting out of bed, I ran to his room, my heart pounding. He was sitting up in bed, his face pale and his eyes wide with terror. "There was someone in my room," he whispered. I turned on the light, scanning the room. It was empty, but the window was open, the curtains fluttering in the cold night air. "It was just a bad dream," I said, though I didn't believe it. Ethan shook his head. "No, he was here. The clown." A chill ran down my spine. "Go to Mom and Dad's room," I said. "Now." As soon as Ethan left, I locked his window and pulled the curtains shut. My phone buzzed on his nightstand, the screen lighting up with an unknown number. I hesitated before answering. "Hello." A low chuckle came through the line, sending ice through my veins. "Did you really think you could get away?" The clown's voice hissed. I hung up, my hands trembling. The power went out. The house plunged into darkness, and I heard the faint, rhythmic sound of balloons popping, one after another. The sound grew louder, closer, until it was right outside Ethan's door. I held my breath, backing away. The door creaked open slowly, revealing the clown, his glowing eyes the only source of light. "Trick or treat," he whispered, his voice dripping with malice. What happened next is a blur. I remember screaming, throwing anything I could find at him, and running. The house seemed to twist and stretch, the walls closing in on me as I tried to escape. When I finally burst out the front door, the clown was gone. The house was silent, still. No one believed me when I told them what happened. Ethan stopped talking about that night, but I could see the fear in his eyes whenever we passed the old house. Halloween came and went, but the nightmares stayed. And every year on October 31st, I find a single red balloon tied to my mailbox, a reminder that he's still out there, waiting. It started on Halloween night, the last time I'd ever go trick-or-treating. I was 16, too old maybe, but my friends dared me to go anyway. They said it would be my final hurrah before adulthood swallowed me whole. "Come on," said Eric, slapping my shoulder. "One last time. Hit the creepy neighborhood. Bet you can't make it to Old Hollow Street without chickening out." Everyone laughed, but I could see the unease behind their eyes. Old Hollow Street wasn't just another quiet cul-de-sac. People whispered about it, how the houses were always dark, the streetlights buzzed ominously, and the air seemed colder there. I scoffed, masking my nervousness. "Easy. I'll get candy from every house." Eric's grin widened. "Every house." So, I donned a lazy skeleton costume, grabbed a pillowcase, and started my journey. My friends followed at a safe distance, like vultures waiting for me to crash. The first few houses on the outskirts of Old Hollow were nothing special: dark porches, no decorations, and a few half-hearted bowls of candy. The vibe was off, though. Even the few houses that participated seemed forced, like they didn't really want to. Then I turned the corner onto Old Hollow Street. The air changed instantly. The temperature dropped, and a strange, metallic taste lingered on my tongue. The streetlights flickered, casting long, jittery shadows. My friends stopped at the corner, refusing to follow me further. "Good luck," Eric called, though his voice sounded smaller, like the street swallowed it whole. I rolled my eyes and stepped forward. The first house was dark but had a single jack-o'-lantern on the porch. Its grin was unnaturally wide, the flickering candle casting eerie shadows that made it look like its eyes were moving. I knocked. No answer. I knocked again, louder. The door creaked open on its own. "Trick or treat," I called, trying to sound brave. A long silence followed before a hand. A pale, thin hand with fingers too long reached out from the darkness, holding a single piece of candy. It dropped it into my bag without a word and retreated back into the shadows. I swallowed hard and moved to the next house. It was the same story. Dark windows, an almost suffocating quiet, and something off about the atmosphere. At one house, the door didn't open, but the mailbox creaked open and candy slid out on its own. At another, a voice whispered from behind the door, "Take it and go." The further I went down the street, the weirder it got. The shadows felt alive, shifting and stretching toward me. At one point, I thought I heard footsteps behind me, but every time I turned around, no one was there. Then I reached the last house. Unlike the others, this one was fully lit, glowing warmly like an inviting beacon. The porch was decorated with cobwebs, plastic skeletons, and orange string lights. A bowl of candy sat on a table by the door with a sign, "Take one." Relieved, I reached for the candy. "Stop!" The voice was low, gravelly, and so close it felt like someone was breathing down my neck. I spun around, but no one was there. When I turned back to the bowl, the sign had changed. It now read, "Leave one or else." My heart pounded. I fumbled in my pocket, pulling out a penny, the only thing I had on me, and placed it in the bowl. The moment the penny clinked against the glass, the lights flickered and went out. A door slammed behind me. I turned and saw the house's front door wide open. The warm glow from inside had been replaced by pitch-black darkness. "Come in," said the same voice, now echoing from deep within the house. Every instinct told me to run, but my legs felt rooted to the spot. A cold breeze pushed me forward, and before I knew it, I was stepping through the threshold. The door slammed shut behind me. Inside, the house was completely silent. The air smelled of mildew and something metallic, blood, maybe. The floorboards creaked beneath my feet as I moved cautiously down the hallway. "Hello," I whispered. A shadow darted past me. My breath hitched. I turned, but nothing was there. Then I heard it. A faint, hollow laughter, like children giggling but distorted, as if played backward, came from upstairs. "Is someone there?" I called out, my voice trembling. The laughter stopped. A loud thump echoed from above, followed by the sound of footsteps, slow, deliberate, heading toward the staircase. I bolted for the front door, but it wouldn't budge. I yanked and pulled, but it was like it had fused with the frame. "Leaving so soon?" the voice taunted, now coming from all around me. I turned and saw them. Figures, tall, thin, and wrong, emerged from the shadows. Their faces were pale, their eyes sunken and black, and their mouths stretched into impossibly wide grins. They moved unnaturally, jerking and twitching as they closed in. I backed away, my heart racing. "Take it and go," one of them hissed, holding out a piece of candy. I didn't think. I grabbed it and stuffed it into my bag. Suddenly, everything went silent. When I looked up, the figures were gone, and the front door was wide open. Without hesitation, I sprinted outside, not stopping until I reached the corner where my friends waited. "Dude, you okay?" Eric asked, his face pale. I couldn't speak. I just handed him my bag and walked home, leaving him and the others behind. That night, I dumped the candy into the trash and swore never to go trick-or-treating again. But the story doesn't end there. The next morning, I found a single piece of candy on my nightstand, the same kind the figures had given me, and the note beneath it read, "You forgot to leave one." Halloween has always been my favorite night of the year. Something about the mix of crisp autumn air, the glow of jack-o'-lanterns, and the rush of visiting strangers' houses for candy gave me a thrill. But this year, Halloween became something much darker, something I'll never forget. I was 17, and it was my last planned night of trick-or-treating. My friends had all bailed on me, claiming we were too old for costumes and candy. But I didn't care. I wasn't ready to let go of the one night a year where anything felt possible, where the boundaries of reality blurred just enough to make me feel alive. I threw on my costume, a tattered vampire cape and some cheap face paint, and grabbed my candy bucket. My neighborhood was lively as ever, kids running from house to house, parents chatting in the glow of porch lights. But I didn't stick to the usual route. Instead, I decided to venture down Harper's Hollow, the older part of town. People rarely went there anymore. The houses were large, looming Victorian structures that had seen better days, their windows dark and their lawns overgrown. Most of the residents had either moved or passed on. That's where I saw him. At the end of the street, standing perfectly still under the dim glow of a flickering streetlight, was a man in a Joker costume. Not the playful, brightly colored Joker you'd expect to see on Halloween. No, this was something far more unsettling. His suit was tattered, his face painted in streaky, uneven white and red, the grin on his lips slashing upward into his cheeks. His hair hung limp and greasy, dyed an unnatural shade of green. He wasn't moving, wasn't talking to anyone, just standing there, holding a small black bag in one hand and twirling a single, worn playing card between the fingers of the other. The sight of him sent a shiver crawling down my spine. "Nice costume," I muttered to myself, trying to shake the unease. I figured he was just someone trying to scare the local kids. But as I passed him, his eyes locked onto me. Not in a casual glance, but in a cold, unblinking stare that made me feel like he could see straight through my skin. "Trick or treat," he rasped, his voice low and gravelly. I hesitated. No one else was around, and the houses on this street were all dark. Treat," I said, forcing a weak laugh. His grin widened unnaturally, the red paint on his lips cracking. Slowly, he extended the black bag toward me. "Take one," he said. I reached into the bag. My fingers brushed something small and cold. Definitely not candy. I pulled it out and held it up to the light. It was a playing card, the Joker worn and stained with what looked like dried blood. "Funny?" I said, trying to hand it back, but he didn't take it. Instead, he stepped closer, his grin frozen in place. "Keep it," he whispered. "You'll need it later." I shoved the card into my pocket and hurried away, my heart pounding. I told myself it was just a prank, that he was some weirdo trying to mess with people. But something about the encounter stuck with me. As I made my way through Harper's Hollow, the night seemed to grow colder, quieter. The houses I passed looked wrong somehow, their windows like dark eyes watching me. Even the distant sounds of children laughing seemed to fade into an eerie silence. When I reached the last house on the street, a massive, dilapidated mansion with a broken gate and a single, flickering porch light, I felt compelled to go up to it. My body moved on its own, as if I were being pulled by some unseen force. The porch creaked under my weight as I approached the door. There was no doorbell, just a rusted iron knocker shaped like a twisted face. I lifted it and let it fall with a heavy thud. The door swung open almost immediately. Standing in the doorway was the Joker. I stumbled back, my blood running cold. "How? You're late," he said, his grin stretching wider than before. "Come in." I shook my head, stepping backward, but my legs hit something solid. I turned and saw that the gate had closed behind me. The Joker tilted his head, his black eyes glittering. "Trick it is, then." Before I could react, the porch beneath me gave way, and I fell. I hit the ground hard, the air knocked from my lungs. When I opened my eyes, I realized I was no longer outside. I was in a long, dark hallway lit by flickering, buzzing fluorescent lights. "Hello," I called, my voice echoing. No response. The walls were lined with doors, each one slightly ajar. From behind them came faint sounds. Laughter, whispers, cries. I walked forward, my footsteps unnervingly loud. As I passed the first door, I glanced inside. It was a small room, empty except for a single chair and a mirror on the wall. In the reflection, I saw myself, but I wasn't alone. The Joker stood behind me, grinning. I spun around, but the hallway was empty. The next door I passed led to another strange room, this one filled with hundreds of playing cards scattered across the floor. Each one was the Joker, and each one had my name scrawled across it in shaky red letters. By the time I reached the end of the hallway, my hands were trembling, my mind racing with fear. A single door stood before me, larger than the others, its surface carved with intricate, chaotic patterns. I pushed it open. Inside was a massive, dimly lit room. At its center was a circular table, and sitting around it were figures dressed like clowns, their faces grotesque and twisted. At the head of the table sat the Joker, his grin wider than ever. "Welcome to the game," he said, his voice echoing. "What do you want?" I demanded, my voice cracking. He chuckled, shuffling a deck of cards. "We play, of course. 1 round. If you win, you leave. If you lose, well, let's not ruin the surprise." He dealt the cards with inhuman speed, his movements a blur. I didn't understand the rules, didn't even know what I was supposed to do. But when I looked at the hand I'd been dealt, my heart sank. All jokers. The figures around the table burst into distorted laughter, the sound clawing at my ears. The Joker leaned closer, his grin splitting his face in two. "Your turn," he whispered. I don't remember much after that. Just the laughter, the cold, and the suffocating darkness that swallowed me whole. When I woke up, I was lying on the street outside the mansion, clutching the blood-stained Joker card in my hand. And now, every Halloween, I see him, standing under the streetlight, waiting, his black bag in hand. And I know one day I'll have to play again. It was Halloween night, the one night of the year when the whole town came alive. Kids dashed from house to house, their laughter echoing through the crisp air. Jack-o'-lanterns flickered on porches, their grins mischievous and welcoming. This year, I decided to go all out, a final hurrah before leaving the childish traditions behind. My friends and I had planned the ultimate route, one that would take us deep into the older part of town, where the houses were bigger and the candy was rumored to be better. But plans have a way of unraveling. By the time the sun dipped below the horizon, I was on my own. My friends had bailed for a party, leaving me with my costume, a simple skeleton hoodie and face paint, and my bucket. I wasn't ready to go home yet. There was still one street left, Dairy Lane. The name alone gave me pause. Dairy Lane was notorious in our town. It was lined with ancient houses that sagged under the weight of years and neglect. The street was rarely visited, and for good reason. Rumors of disappearances and strange happenings swirled around it like dead leaves in the wind. But candy was candy, and I wasn't ready to end the night empty-handed. The moment I stepped onto Dairy Lane, the atmosphere shifted. The laughter and chatter of Halloween faded, replaced by an eerie stillness. The air felt heavier, colder. The only sound was the crunch of my sneakers on the cracked pavement. I approached the first house, its windows dark and its porch light flickering weakly. Still, the jack-o'-lantern on the steps seemed inviting enough. I knocked. Nothing. I knocked again, louder this time. Just as I was about to give up, the door creaked open an inch. No one was there, but a single piece of candy sat on the threshold, a small, wrapped caramel. I picked it up and put it in my bucket, trying to ignore the feeling of being watched. The second house was much the same. No answer, just a piece of candy waiting on the porch. By the third house, I noticed something strange. Every piece of candy was the same brand of caramel, The wrappers faded and sticky as though they'd been sitting for years. I should have turned back then, but curiosity and greed pushed me forward. It was at the fifth house that I saw him. A figure emerged from the shadows, stepping into the dim glow of a distant streetlight. He was tall, impossibly tall, dressed in a filthy, antiquated clown suit. His face was painted white, his mouth smeared with a grotesque red grin that stretched too wide, exposing sharp, yellowed teeth. His eyes were what stopped me cold. One of them gazed directly at me while the other seemed to drift lazily upward, giving him an unsettling, unhinged appearance. "Hello?" the clown said, his voice high-pitched and sing-song, yet dripping with malice. I froze, gripping my candy bucket tightly. "You're late for the party," he continued, his grin widening. He stepped closer, his oversized shoes scraping against the pavement. I'm just trick-or-treating," I stammered, my voice barely above a whisper. "Oh, of course you are," he exclaimed, spreading his arms wide. "And I have the best treats. Would you like to see?" Before I could respond, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a red balloon. It floated eerily upward, defying the lack of wind. "Take it," he said, his voice softer now, almost coaxing. I shook my head, my instincts screaming at me to run, but my legs wouldn't move. "You don't want my balloon?" he asked, tilting his head. His grin faltered for a moment, replaced by something darker, something hungry. The air grew colder. Shadows seemed to stretch and twist around him, the streetlights flickering wildly. "No," I managed to choke out, stepping back. His smile returned, but this time it was twisted with cruelty. "Oh, but I insist." He snapped his fingers, and the balloon exploded with a deafening pop. In its place was not candy or a toy, but something wet and slimy that splattered onto the ground. I couldn't tell what it was, but the smell, metallic and rancid, made my stomach churn. "Run," he whispered, his voice echoing unnaturally. I didn't need to be told twice. I turned and sprinted down the street, my bucket bouncing against my leg. I glanced back once, just in time to see him loping after me, his long limbs moving in unnatural, jerky motions. His grin never wavered. The houses blurred as I ran, the street stretching endlessly before me. My breath came in ragged gasps, my heart pounding in my ears. No matter how fast I ran, the sound of his laughter followed me, high-pitched and maniacal, like nails on a chalkboard. Finally, I saw the end of the street, the glow of normalcy beyond the shadows of Dairy Lane. I pushed myself harder, my legs burning with the effort. Just as I reached the corner, something cold and clammy clamped around my ankle, yanking me off my feet. I hit the ground hard, my candy spilling across the pavement. I twisted around, and there he was, his face inches from mine. "Don't you want to play?" he hissed, his breath reeking of decay. I screamed, kicking wildly. My foot connected with something solid, and for a brief moment his grip loosened. I scrambled to my feet and bolted, not stopping until I was safely back on the brightly lit streets of my neighborhood. When I finally looked back, Dairy Lane was empty. The shadows seemed deeper, darker, but there was no sign of him. I told myself it was just a Halloween prank, some deranged guy trying to scare kids. But when I got home and emptied my bucket, my blood ran cold. Among the scattered caramels and lollipops was a single red balloon, tied to a playing card. On it was a crude drawing of a clown, its grin impossibly wide. And scrawled beneath it, in dark, dripping ink, were the words, "I'll see you next year. I don't go out on Halloween anymore." Halloween always had a way of sending chills down my spine, but this year was different. The air felt heavier, charged with something unseen. My town wasn't known for extravagant Halloween celebrations, but the legend of that clown, the one who had haunted Derry decades ago, still lingered. It was just a story to most of us, a cautionary tale told to scare kids into staying close to their parents on Halloween night. I didn't believe in it, not really, but as I ventured out into the cool October evening, a voice in the back of my mind whispered that maybe, just maybe, I should have stayed home. I had decided to go trick-or-treating alone this year. At 16, my friends thought they were too old for it, and my little brother had opted to stay in playing video games. But I couldn't resist the lure of one last nostalgic night. Dressed in a tattered vampire costume, I clutched a pillowcase and wandered into the deeper, quieter part of town. It started out normal enough. A few houses gave out candy, while others simply ignored my knocks. The streets grew darker the farther I went, the streetlights dimmer, flickering as if unsure of their purpose. And then I saw it. At the end of a cul-de-sac stood an old, decrepit house that I'd never noticed before. Its windows were shattered, and the porch sagged dangerously, but a single jack-o'-lantern burned brightly on the steps, casting long, dancing shadows. I hesitated. The house looked abandoned, but the jack-o'-lantern suggested otherwise. Against my better judgment, I approached. "Trick or treat," I called, my voice cracking slightly. The door creaked open. No one was there, just a long, dark hallway that seemed to stretch on forever. Something about the air spilling out of the doorway felt wrong. Cold, damp, and heavy, like a storm was brewing inside the house. I should have walked away. Instead, I stepped onto the porch, peering into the shadows. "Hello," I said, louder this time. A faint sound reached my ears, a soft, wheezy giggle that seemed to come from everywhere at once. My heart raced and I turned to leave. That's when I saw him. At first, he was just a silhouette, standing under a flickering street lamp at the far end of the road. But as the light steadied, I saw him clearly. He was tall and gaunt, wearing a filthy, oversized clown suit adorned with tattered ribbons and pom-poms. His face was a mask of white paint, his mouth smeared with a grotesque red smile that seemed to split his face in two. And his eyes, God, his eyes. One was golden, glowing faintly in the dark, while the other rolled lazily in its socket, as if it couldn't decide where to look. "Hello there," he said, his voice syrupy and sweet, yet laced with something dark and predatory. I stumbled back, my pillowcase slipping from my fingers. The candy spilled out, but I couldn't tear my gaze away from him. "You're a little old for trick-or-treating, don't you think?" he said, his smile widening to an impossible degree. I was just leaving," I stammered, taking a step back toward the house. His laugh was low and guttural, reverberating through the air like distant thunder. "Oh, but the fun's just begun." In a blink, he was closer, standing in the middle of the street. The way he moved didn't make sense. It wasn't walking, more like gliding, his body jerking unnaturally with each step. I bolted. I didn't care where I was going, as long as it was away from him. The streets twisted and turned, unfamiliar and disorienting. It was as if the town had rearranged itself. Every corner I turned brought me face to face with another dark alley or an endless row of shadowed houses. His laughter followed me, growing louder and more manic. "You can't run from me," he sang, his voice echoing around me. I tripped over a cracked sidewalk, landing hard on my hands and knees. Before I could get up, I felt a hand, cold, clammy, and impossibly strong, wrap around my ankle. "Gotcha," he hissed. I kicked out desperately, connecting with something soft and yielding. The grip loosened, and I scrambled to my feet, running blindly until I found myself in front of the old house again. The jack-o'-lantern was still there, its grin mocking me. The door was wide open now, revealing not the hallway I'd seen earlier, but something else entirely. It was a void, an endless expanse of darkness that seemed to pulse with a life of its own. And from that void came the sound of children crying, their voices faint and distant, like they were trapped far below. "Come on in," Pennywise said, appearing beside me. His grin was gone now, replaced by an expression of pure, malevolent hunger. His golden eye glowed brighter, illuminating the sharp, yellowed teeth that filled his mouth. I backed away, shaking my head. "No, no, please," he lunged. I don't remember much after that, just flashes. His hands gripping my shoulders, his face inches from mine, the sickly sweet smell of decay filling my nostrils. And then I was falling. The void swallowed me whole, the cries of the children growing louder and louder until they were all I could hear. I woke up in my bed, drenched in sweat, my heart racing. For a moment, I thought it had all been a nightmare. But when I looked down, I saw the pillowcase on the floor, torn and empty, and in its place was a single red balloon, tied to a card with 2 words scrawled in blood-red ink: "See you soon." I haven't gone out on Halloween since, but every year, without fail, a red balloon appears on my doorstep, swaying gently in the wind.